going to start out with what is very common called the logo. Logos have prevailed as an encapsulation of sales and also affiliation with particular groups or lifestyles when it comes to consumption. So the logo is a type of a concentration and it's kind of an elaboration of many of the previous tactics that are used in advertising since the 19th century. Brands began as a way to cluster or identify a commodity by a manufacturer, but they later took on associations for people that easily linked the type of the commodity that they liked and to the reliable kind of quality that it had. And it was early on a habit of consumption to associate the name of the product with what you wanted or were used to. The logo as a tactic in terms of advertising is now everywhere. And what's unique about it is that it moved away from an inherent or actual link or quality link to the quality or value of a commodity. And instead, it focuses on the representation of what the brand wants you to associate with that commodity, right? So that what they're selling is an idea or a lifestyle. They're not trying to sell you the actual thing itself. A brand is a signifier of social values, and as such is a portable stamp of social aspiration or group identity, and it no longer is directly linked to the product's actual use or value. The lifestyle or social status established through the brand's ubiquity, like how common it is what's for sale, and the commodity is more often than not incidental or strategic. So the brand is actually the product. The commodities in a brand's kind of collection. If it's Nike, it might have anything to do with outdoor living, but you can also see, for example, Eddie Bauer did an edition of the Ford Explorer many years ago. So, if we think about brands in the same way that we thought about the Visual Fluencies project, a brand is a sort of an icon and it's a symbol at the same time. It becomes an icon over time, but it symbolizes something that is a lifestyle or value system that the company wants you to associate with, much like you might make a friend. So, if we were to look at this in terms of our visual fluency project, you might argue that logos operate a lot like the way metaphors operate. They also especially operate as a part-to-whole relationship, which is the synecdoche, or they're associative like the metonymy, right? They're rarely ironic.
The process of branding in its simplest form is just the process of marking a product with a consistent logo, image, mascot that sends a message to the consumer. A message of consistency, a message of quality. This process became really important with the advent of mass industrialization when goods were being produced in factories and mass transport. Because what that meant is that all kinds of products that people used to buy from a local shopkeeper or a local farmer who they had a relationship with locally were now coming off of trains, trucks, and out of factories. And this was quite actually scary at the turn of the century because the relationship of trust that you had with that shopkeeper or with that farmer when it was just spooned out of the barrel or scooped out of the barrel was now subverted by these goods coming from far away being produced in anonymous factories. So the original brands were comforting logos that were often people, like Quaker Oats or Aunt Jemima, that were essentially surrogate relationships. It was like, okay, you're not buying it from the local shopkeeper, you're not buying it from the local farmer, but here is this image that you can relate to. You can form a personal relationship, albeit a fake personal relationship with this mascot, with this figure. But the message was you can trust it as much as you would trust it if you actually had a real relationship. How did we get from this fairly simple role of the brand of the Aunt Jemima, the Quaker Oats, to these brand tribes that we have now, where we almost follow brands like we would follow rock stars? We organize ourselves into brand tribes. We are a Nike type of person or a Tommy Hilfiger type of person. How did that happen? There were a handful of brands that understood that marketing could play a larger role than simply branding their product as a mark of quality. They understood that they could sell ideas, that they could sell lifestyles. Coca-Cola, Disney, McDonald's, these core American brands became powerful precisely because they understood that they were selling ideas instead of products, that they were selling an idea about family. Coca-Cola was selling the youth lifestyle. In the 60s, they started selling peace and love. They were selling something way more profound than their fairly generic product, which was this black fizzy liquid. Walt Disney understood that he was selling the American dream. He was selling a nostalgic vision of the small-time American town that people felt sad about. They felt that it had disappeared. The CEO of Nike, Phil Knight, says that he had a kind of an epiphany in the mid-'80s where he realized that he didn't want to compete in a commodity marketplace anymore, that he did not want to be a sneaker company, or as he said, a fashion company. He wanted to be a sports company. And that their core image or their core idea was not about their sneakers being better than Reebok's, but was an idea about the nature of sports, and that pure athletic ability and the raw ability of truly superstar athletes like Tiger Woods and Michael Jordan is a kind of metaphor for the American dream. And so he decided to sell that idea. When you have a culture where ideas are not treated as being connected to belief or action, but are just commodity and just to be used and attached, oh, diversity, let's use that to sell Benetton sweaters. Community, let's use that for Starbucks. The ideas themselves are devalued.
Well, I think it could be debatable whether or not the ideas are devalued, because I feel like that puts a lot of power into the people who make the brands, as though we as a group of people who are consuming stuff, including advertisements, don't have a choice. It's a one-way street, and it's not. And that's what the project is about. These are some other examples of the Think Different campaign. It's quite old now, but Apple kind of made a big move in the 80s when they had a user interface that was what's called a graphic user interface that was kind of a click. What you click is what you get. Just to give, so what's happened here is that the logo of Apple stands in for, and kind of part to whole relationship is associating itself with these famous creative great minds. And so by extension, Apple is also sort of like jumping onto the coattails of these companies. That's Jim Henson, of course, who invented the Muppets. And Naomi Klein just spoke briefly about Nike. I wanted to show you a little bit about Benetton. Benetton, I think, kind of missed the mark, but I think it was early on when logos were trying to establish what they were doing. And it wasn't as though somebody had a specific idea. I think that people like Christopher Knight and others really brought together a series of values and approaches that others brought their own intelligence to and started to use. Benetton started to create these ads in the late 80s and early 90s, where they were still dealing with shock value. So what's interesting is that while it's not necessarily a logo yet, there is this effort to try to get viewers to have this shocking kind of reaction to Benetton, and that's what these images do. A lot of these ads, understandably, did not go over well in the United States and in Western Europe. But again, they could just say, well, it's just an ad. We're just going for shock value. This man is actually dying of AIDS. And so what ends up happening in the logosphere is that life itself, the lived experience of everyday problems and everyday hungers and desires and aspirations, becomes the raw materials from which the logo sphere draws its inspiration. And everything thus becomes sort of flattened like a commodity, even this kind of thing where their son is dying. Budweiser, it's the same type of thing. So whereas these some of the logos, say like Benetton or Apple, have these more kind of social aspirations about their logos, others just keep it fairly simple, right? And so again, the logo is, and this sort of image plus logo. Notice again here that the logo is the only thing there that indicates what is for sale, and so as what you've seen over the course of the 20th century, at least, is the progressive diminishment of the presence of the product itself in advertising. I wanted to also cover the psychological and social manipulation or use of persuasion in advertising. And this is kind of where it overlaps with propaganda. Something called alder casting. There's a in the reading that I've provided for you guys on Canvas, you can read about a lot of the more contemporary versions of this type of advertising that's being used in conjunction with the logosphere. So in mandate alter casting, the advertisement makes use of it. It's a phenomenon that's studied in social psychology. It's the technique used in persuasion research, which involves highlighting a particular social role associated with a person, or assigning a new social role, influencing this person to behave in line with what's expected of that kind of a label. These are sort of pro-social conditions, and they kind of allow the viewer to complete the circle of communication. And so what I wanted to do, the mandate alter casting in this case, alter casting is, and again in hidden persuasion, you'll see a lot of the tactics here, which you can also use in your projects. So in these ads, there's the logo, but notice that it's not specifically identifying anything in particular that you should purchase. What it's doing is it's showing you the type of person that is associated with Under Armour, right? So whatever this visual communicates to you, then you might associate that with someone who's fit, someone who's active, flexible, whatever you want, right? And so again, so the mandate alter casting is a way of putting you in the position of the person or the people in the ad. So it's not just like, see, you can be like me, but that you are like me. It's just a matter of time. Also, the other thing in alter casting and mandate alter casting is the word mandate means that it's requiring something of you to make a decision of some kind, right? Are you going to associate yourself with one value or another? Are you going to agree with or disagree with so you can think of the advertisements as types of proposals, social proposals to you, that you can either take it or leave it. What's interesting to me about this is that the take it or leave it is also the same kind of mentality that goes into shopping, right? So more often than not, when we go shopping, we either like something, we don't like it, or we just don't care. Okay, so this is the alter casting in that case is a way of trying to get you to care by getting you to kind of have a compassionate point of view toward the situation that that product is a part of. Another tactic that's used is called the promised land. And it's a way of referring to a future that you might possess. And underneath all this is the tendency to focus on what you are lacking. And so in this Jeep commercial, there's all these sort of, again, part to whole relationships, metaphors, symbols of fun, symbols of freedom, symbols of vacation, and that kind of thing. Most of us don't live on vacation. We don't have vacation. Most of us can't afford to go on vacation, but those who can, that's an aspiration for many of us. So what Jeep is doing here is they're presenting to us the finish line of where we might be, and that their product could help us get there. So again, If you watched the ad in the ego video that I posted, you'll notice that it's sort of like the opposite of therapy. It kind of produces this sense of incompleteness, and then it proposes the product as an antidote to that incompleteness, right? Fear, this is also used in propaganda, which we'll talk about later. Somewhat obvious. It has to do with an appeal to uncertainty and insecurities in people by invoking the fear of the consequences of one thing or another. These are a lot of times used in public service announcements or public health oriented messages. So this is meant to build guilt in you, right? Or to put you in a position where you feel obliged to do something, right? So that is the fear or the discomfort tactic. Scarcity, while supplies last, is kind of a really easy one. It's sort of the building of the anticipation or lack or the fear that you won't be able to acquire the things that others have. It's a way of introducing competition into it. You can think of Black Friday as kind of one of the most amazing versions of scarcity, right? It also shows up in social media. You might be shopping for something online, and you might see in the thing only one left. Order now, right? And so that's again a way of creating a kind of anxiety in you to get you to do something. Notice that there's a tendency toward anxiety in a lot of these ads, right? Or the development of an insecurity in a lot of these ads. Attractiveness can be has become sort of cliche at this point. Its effects on teen women and men are significant, and so I don't think I need to go too far into this. But if we look at representations of Disney princesses, a lot of these come from and are informed by post-World War II exaggeration of features that were rooted in a sort of an iconic whiteness. I'll say that, and I mean that in the sense of like an Americanness, right? Like the good old boy kind of thing. And so this translated into post-World War II anime, and they called it déformé, which was the kind of a deformed or kind of an exaggerated style in Japanese animation and manga. And so there are a lot of these traits of attractiveness that go into this, and they can sort of be boiled down into these kind of ingredients, like a chiseled blue eyes, a chiseled chin, that kind of thing, right? And then it also cuts both ways. So when there are bad guys or good guys, there's also another kind of a typecasting going on. And that extends to the voices of the characters that are hired to play those roles in movies. De Beers is really famous for creating scarcity and also introducing us to that social tradition of giving somebody a diamond ring to indicate that you want to get married to them. De Beers invented that as an ad campaign in the early part of the 20th century. De Beers is a Dutch company that created a monopoly of diamond excavation and in Africa, and they also, as such, because they had a monopoly, they could also create scarcity, which they did, which drove the price of diamonds through the roof. And then they also linked their diamonds into our own kind of social fabric of dedication to another person via marriage. Sex, I feel like this is just so easy. More than 50% of ads use some sort of a sexual oriented content. And it is, I think, almost overdone. I could go into it, but I feel like there's plenty of examples that we could use. But I think what we might want to do is better focus on how sexuality or perhaps intimacy is naturalized around particular gender norms and expectations, right? And those things have to do with propaganda, with in terms of like flooding the market with the message, right? So the more messages you see about a particular way of being as normal in a society, the more likely you are to feel anxiety about it if you don't fit neatly into that category. I think I showed you enough of the shock advertising with the Benetton examples. And these are kind of fun. These are also located in your reading. So this is what's called a bait and switch, right? So you're drawing people in by something. It's sort of like clickbait, early clickbait, right? So and then they kind of switch up the news on you. So hipsters deserve to die, and then they talk about lung cancer, right? So this is a lung cancer PSA. World Wildlife Fund does a great kind of, again, a bait and switch kind of thing. They're using irony in this, and that was another one of our choices in our visual fluency project. Anthropomorphism is really obvious. Has been studied extensively that the use of animals or kind of a transfer, right, of one messenger with a particular message, if that transfer is generalized like an animation, then it's usually easier to get across. With regard to anthropomorphism, I have a video uploaded for you guys that you guys can check out in the videos page. Implementation intention, and this is to do with what are you going to do about it, right? It's like we're presenting you the situation. What would you do, right? So in this case, it's pretty simple. Walmart, save money, live better. It's pretty simple choice. Don't go somewhere else. Just do it at Walmart, right? Again, another bait and switch or irony, right? Save, don't save. So the implementation intention involved in doing and using that tactic in advertising usually either implies or explicitly expresses a need for you to make a choice. What are you going to do? Social proof, this really is a reiteration or a recapitulation of the very early, kind of like the very early 1960s and 70s versions of advertising where you had a spokesperson. Okay. It is actually true. They had physicians on record saying that smoking cigarettes is not bad for you. Again, this has to do with look, we've sold billions and billions. It's perfectly fine. Obviously, if you're not among them, then you're missing out on something. Guarantees, same thing. These are really subtle differences in each of these ads, and it's not like anything you haven't already figured out just by looking at it. But it's a way of grouping advertising strategies into a cluster. Astroturfing is another one that's common. It's a deliberate or fake or deliberately generated social media proof that usually employed to create an impression of like popular support. And it's most effectively used in targeted audience and interest groups. So it's kind of like an insider way of appealing to you, right? Talked about this a little bit before with Scarcity. This is, again, the amount of messaging that you see. So, for example, when cable came out, people could begin to curate their watching habits and their viewing habits. Before cable and before paid TV subscriptions, people pretty much got what the networks put on. and your only choice was whether or not you were available at a particular time to watch it. Now what people can do is they can pick their own version of politics that they want to watch. They can pick their own version of news that they want to watch. And they can pick any variety of things. And so one way of thinking about the logosphere and a lot of these psychological and social tactics is that what we buy, the brands that we engage in, the brands that we support, become a part of representation of who we are or who we want to project we are. Decoy, this is super easy. Oftentimes, let's see if my doublespeak works.
In the political theatre, it's easy for parties to change the script to suit the scene when support's not going their way. But are American voters willing to read between the lines and work out what's really meant? RT's Maria Portnaya tries to find out.
The art of politics is made up of many things. Handshakes, smiles, and a good arsenal of verbal camouflage.
Americans have a lot of trouble dealing with reality. Americans have trouble facing the truth.
Or as the late American comedian George Carlin put it, euphemistic language that conceals reality.
Poor people used to live in slums. Now the economically disadvantaged occupy substandard housing in the inner cities. And they're broke. They're broke. They don't have a negative cash flow position. They're broke.
And today, America's love affair with semantics has given birth to a new phrase to describe the rich.
Job creators in America basically are on strike.
Increasing taxes on job creators. This administration and this president, policies are hostile to job creators.
Instead of just saying the wealthy who make over $250,000 a year, if you say job creator, then you say, well, we can't raise their taxes. They're the ones who create jobs. When in reality, when their taxes were higher under Bill Clinton, 3 times as many jobs were created.
The propensity to add softer terms to the English lexicon has surged over the decades, particularly when it comes to military-related language.
There's a condition in combat. Most people know about it. It's when a fighting person's nervous system has been stressed to its absolute peak and maximum, can't take any more input. The nervous system has either snapped or is about to snap. In the First World War, that condition was called shell shock.
Today, the same condition is known as an 8-syllable hyphenated phrase void of any emotion.
Post-traumatic stress disorder.
The aftermath of war includes post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah. For those of you suffering from PTSD,
when it comes to wars, where you have the most damaging euphemisms, like when instead of saying innocent civilians were killed, in a drone strike, you say there was collateral damage. Collateral damage, which to me is the worst expression. No, it's innocent men, women, and children were killed. And collateral damage sounds like a real estate transaction.
Allied soldiers shooting each other has become known as
friendly fire.
Kidnapping and transferring a terrorist suspect is called
extraordinary rendition.
And the torture America's war prisoners might endure is referred to as
enhanced interrogation.
In most cases, these new words are used by people trying to define an argument or frame it in a way that will support the position that they're advocating.
And during the last U.S. presidential election, a certain demographic of voters became otherwise known as
without low information voters.
Obama went to Twitter at 2 o'clock today to encourage low information voters.
I think low information voters are stupid people, but you say low information voters because it sounds nice. Although in their defense, it could be people who are just too busy, with their lives, their family, and their work. They don't have time to focus on the election until the very last minute, and then they vote based on the hairstyle of the candidate running for president.
As America's political elite continues creating new vocabulary to soften the hard truth, a greater focus could instead be put into asking why so many issues need to be rephrased before being presented to the public. George Carlin created comedy about the strategy, but it was George Orwell who first coined a term for it. Newspeak. Reporting from New York, Marina Portnaya, RT.
So I want to make a point about RT, which is has become a Russian propaganda site now. And they did, in fact, try to paint a rosier picture of Russia by doing stories like that. But I do want to acknowledge that RT as a media source is not something that I would say is a go-to for truth, but I think that that little clip did actually possess a good kind of pinpoint on doublespeak. So the spokesperson, again, this is still used, especially around the Super Bowl. And again, I'm just running through some stuff we've already seen. So, all right. These are some examples of projects that students have done, and these are spoof ads. And so I just wanted to show you some examples of what students have done in the past. This is a visual representation, early sort of zoning out, listening to your feed or whatever. This was an early Taco Bell advertisement. This is a powerful one. It does have some detail in it, but this is about De Beers. And so, De Beers, the diamond company, a diamond is forever, is what this student did, and they changed the wording a little bit. So in your projects, try not to just simply change the wording and think that that's enough. It's not. You need to use the imagery to back up your wording, and kind of expand upon the what you're trying to accomplish. This had to do with the general. The student's piece had to do with the general proliferation of the use of like antidepressants in young kids. This was about auto-tune early on. This was when phones were getting ridiculously small, and they had more and more features and smaller footprints. Another ad from another student. This was about the kind of mismatch between the aura of having a hybrid car and the reality of their production and their carbon footprint.
Were you an ugly baby? Pudgy face, splotchy complexion, invisible eyebrows, undefined lips? Are you worried about your baby having to endure the same torments? No, you don't have to. Introducing Makeup for Babies. We have a full line of beauty-enhancing products, including foundation, blush, and lipstick, to keep your baby from having to experience the torment of being an ugly child. Makeup for Babies, because your child looks are a reflection on you.
And that sums it up. So those are the examples for the project, and hope you are going to come up with some really interesting, cool ad spoofs for your project. You can do a movie. You can also do a website if you want. It's totally up to you. But anyways, I hope you have fun, and obviously email me with any questions. All right, guys.